Hi guys, my name's Brett Allen and I represent, myself under Unravel Media and Design. With all the new users coming onto Red User and all the people coming over from Final Cut Pro 10 as well, I thought it'd be worthwhile putting together some tutorial videos just to give an introduction into Premiere Pro and go over a bit of an Adobe workflow for Red stuff in particular. So in this video we're going to cover just the basics of Premiere Pro, how to set it up, how to navigate it, and how to do some basic edits and basically export some footage out of it as well. So if that's going to be of use to you, then keep watching. Okay, so we'll launch Premiere. I'm on a solid state drive, so it launches pretty fast here. And I'm going to set up a new project, start right from scratch. So let's name the project Introduction to Premiere Pro. And straight away, actually, we've got some interesting options. This is actually on the wrong setting at the moment. I've got an NVIDIA card with CUDA support in it, which is actually going to help accelerate a whole lot of the effects. So I'm going to change that over to that. Maybe it's been switched because I'm capturing this video at the same time, but we'll see how we go. And also going to have a look at scratch discs. Actually, you know what? I'm going to come back to that later. For the moment, let's just click OK with that. Okay, now the first thing Premiere is going to show us is it's going to give us a prompt to create a new sequence, which is basically Premiere's name for what you would normally call a timeline, I guess, in some other programs. I'm just going to ignore this for now because I'm going to give you a brief overview of the interface and everything first. But we'll come back and we will create a sequence and I'll give you a bit of info on it. So for the moment we can just click cancel. And what I'm going to go through first is just the general interface of Premiere. So up here we've got our project window. This is where all your assets in your project, so any pictures, audio, video files or whatever, they'll all be loaded into this section here. You can create extra bins in here if you're needing to load stuff in. And you can change the view to show like thumbnail previews or just an actual list as well. Now what you can also do, this applies for all of the windows and everything within at least After Effects and Premiere. If you hit the tilde key, which is usually the one above your left hand tab key, when you're hovering over a particular window, it will actually maximize that window, which is a quick little way to get in and out when you're wanting to view a bit more information but you've got limited screen real estate. So just tapping it will enter it, and tapping the tilde key again will get you back out, and it's just wherever your mouse is hovering. So handy little tip there. Okay, so the project window, that's fine. We've got the media browser down here. Within Premiere, I think it was probably in CS4 that introduced it, but don't quote me on that. Adobe added what's called the media browser. So when you were importing footage before, you used to use this project window, which you still can do, but the media browser also lets you browse all the disks on your system and look at them basically from a point of view of media that Premiere understands. So it's going to list files and directories within it. Let's go through a quick example. So my digital negative drive here, these are all the folders that are on it. If I go into stock footage, instantly it's found a red file that's sitting there, and it's going to be able to tell us that we can view folder structures based on different types of footage. So for example, if there had have been EX footage in here, then instead of red being selected, it would have found the EX footage and it can go to that. You can always switch it back out to file directory if you're needing to, so it'll show me other folders that are in there. But we'll come back to that later. Okay, the info panel will just show you info on whatever you're basically working on at the time, because we don't have actually anything set up at the moment. It's not giving us any information whatsoever. The effects panel is what allows us to apply effects, funnily enough. So whether that's video transitions, color grading, audio effects, or even audio transitions, a lot of that stuff will be in there. So if we jump in, pretty much I forget when this got added, but the search bars here will let you search through, in this project panel here, will let you search through all the media in your project. and this one here will let you search through all the effects. So if we know we want a cross dissolve, start typing it in, and it's going to start limiting down every effect that's in that panel down to anything that includes the word cross. So another little handy tip there. These three buttons here are actually quite handy. This one here represents anything that's an accelerated effect. So if you've got an NVIDIA card that supports CUDA acceleration, then if you click this, that'll show you all the effects which your card is going to accelerate rather than your CPU doing the work. This will show you any that use a 32-bit color float when processing colors, and this will show you any that use YUV for color processing as well. Okay, history panel is just the same as it is in Photoshop and other programs. It'll show you everything, all the actions that you've done, and you can jump back within I guess your project and change it back to previous states. Okay, up the top here we've got our effects controls. So once we actually have some footage loaded in there, we can apply these effects onto it, and they'll come listed up in here. I'll revisit this one later because we'll actually start looking at some effects that go on a project. The source timeline here is actually pretty useful. I might just grab some media to be able to show you this. Let me jump in here. So many folders. That is not what I wanted to view it as. Okay, that's interesting. The folder structure for the other one must be a bit off, which is why it's not recognizing it as an EX folder structure. Anyway, this is footage shot on my EX. For people that are using the source monitor, for Final Cut Pro people and other people coming from editing systems, you'll know what a source monitor is already. But for people that are coming to editing brand new, the source monitor is basically a way to look at the footage that you've got in your project before any effects are applied to it. So in this case, this is some footage that was shot down at the beach, not particularly well shot footage, but it shows us no color grading, no effects whatsoever, and we can make selections on here and then place them into our project. Or you can look at footage that's already in your project, and if you wanted to see what it originally looked like before it started getting edited and having effects and whatever else applied to it. On the converse side of things, your program window will come up here. I'll come back to this, but just let me create a really quick sequence. Doesn't really matter what it is, just so I can demonstrate it. Program window up here will show you what your final output is actually looking like. So this is the panel to look at when you're actually wanting to see what's been edited and what it looks like when you're playing it back. Audio mixer, pretty self-explanatory, I guess. It's just going to measure all the audio tracks that are in your sequence, show you their volume levels, let you record voice demos if you're needing to, or solo them, or look at your master level, all that kind of stuff. The metadata panel will show you any metadata that's relevant to the footage. If on set extra metadata is being added in, then that'll come up back on here. And for speech analysis as well, which is one of the things that Premiere can do, if you get it to actually analyze a video for speech, that speech analysis will be placed down in here as well, so you can navigate to certain sections of the footage based on that metadata that Premiere's added into it. Okay, a couple more other ones. Timeline down here, pretty self-explanatory. There's a line with time on it. You load the footage in here, you can cut the footage, watch it back, hit spacebar to play it, and it will be playing up in your program monitor showing you what's going on. Okay, the audio panel over here is just a small audio readout of what this would be telling you as well. Just so you can get an idea of levels and whether it's crazy loud. And then your tools down here are your tools, funnily enough. These are what you use for when you're actually cutting and manipulating the footage. There's keyboard shortcuts for pretty much every single one of them, so you do well to make sure you get a handle around the keyboard shortcuts that you're going to use, rather than manually coming over and finding the tool you need all the time and then coming back and clicking on it. Okay, now what's also good about Premiere is that you may have seen me doing it, but all the menus and everything, they're all dockable and they're all adjustable. So for example, if we don't like the audio mixer over here, we can pull it out either completely. How am I going to do that without it docking onto something else? Okay, this is a bad example. Normally I'd drag it onto another screen, but I'm not recording on that other screen. But I'll come back here. There we go. We've pulled it out. So you can leave it as a floating window if you want, or you could always dock it back in onto another panel, or even dock it in beside another panel, which makes it really flexible, and it means you can set up your workspace to be exactly what you need depending on the project that you're working on. Now, in addition to all the ones that are here, if you go up to Window up the top, it's going to show you a whole lot of extra windows that aren't actually displayed at the moment. So, for example, if we needed to capture footage from a camera that was hooked in by a firewire or a tape deck or something like that, you go to this and you'd set it up, which I'm not going to cover in this one, but you'd set it up to capture from that, and you'd hit capture and record it, and it would dump it into your project. Another really useful one that's in here is a multi-camera monitor. If you're doing a concert edit, this is actually a really bad example because I don't have a multi-camera sequence set up at the moment, but if I did, you would see 4 little windows in here and 1 preview window in here, and you can select between all of them while you're editing, and it'll record those edits, and you get the gist. You can control multiple cameras at once. So yeah, there's a few more that are in there, like the titler and VST editor and other ones like that, but generally your basics will be here as you start. By default, Adobe help you out. If you go to Window Workspace, or even, actually it's not there in this layout, but if you go to Window Workspace, they've set you up a couple of presets, I guess, for different workspaces. So if you're doing audio correction, for example, we can click on that, and they've set us up a workspace preset that will let us focus on audio editing a bit better. So your audio controls are maximized, your effects are up here as well, so they're more easily accessible, and whatever they seem to think helps out. Okay, this is what I was going to show you before. Now that we've actually selected different workspace, this little bar's come up here, so we can just keep changing between them. So if I jump back to the editing workspace, which is taking a ridiculous amount of time, probably because I'm capturing this at the same time, we can do that. We can also, I have no idea why this is running so slowly, but we can also, if we're going to, say, make a custom configuration, we're going to move this around, we're going to put this down here in an absolutely horrible location. Let's say we thought this was the best way to edit in the world, which it's not, but let's say we thought it was and it suited our purposes great. You can actually make a new workspace based on that. You can save that workspace, call it worst workspace in the world. And our workspace is now the worst workspace in the world. So if we're wanting to jump back to editing, then it will... Oh, actually, let me double confirm that for you. Because we made those settings while we were in editing, it's actually updated the editing one as well. So you can reset the current workspace. So we're going to reset editing to the way it originally was, which will go back to a nice layout. But we've still got that worst workspace in the world, which we can click back on that, and we're back to that horrible workspace again. So I'm just going to delete. Actually, I can't delete that one because I've got it active. Let's try changing this back to editing. Delete workspace. Worst workspace in the world. It's gone, so we're never going to see that again, thank goodness. Okay, so now that those are set up, what other topics we've got to cover? Okay, so setting up a secondary monitor. If you've got 2 monitors like I do, then the easiest way to get a preview of what's going on in the other monitor at the same time is to go up to the little tab here, click on playback settings, and you can set up an external device. So in my case, I've got monitor 2, which is another 24-inch monitor. We can click on that, and if I was to do that and play back, it would basically fill up the my whole other screen with just a preview image. One bad thing about doing it that way is because you're actually going to have your program window here as well as another one onto the other screen, your computers are actually having to render that video out twice, so you're going to get worse performance. I thought it would work well sometimes it does, other times it's not so great. So your other option to do is to completely undock your program window, if it's going to let me, just drag it onto your other screen, which you guys can't see at the moment, and then just blow it up fairly big on your other screen, because then it's only having to render it once, so you're going to get a bit better performance that way. For now, however, I'm going to, let's reset that workspace. For now, we'll leave it back in there, that's fine. Now, one of the other things you might notice that change between different versions of, or different people's copies of Premiere, is how dark and how light the actual interface is. So if we go to Edit and then Preferences, and we go to Appearance, we get this little slider here that lets us adjust the appearance of Premiere altogether. This is kind of what it used to look like back in the Premiere 6.0 days, before it went Premiere Pro and a couple of versions after that. But ever since then, it seemed to be kind of the latest thing to make a dark interface. So default sits around there. I usually like to let it sit around there, but take it for what it's worth. You can adjust it to your fancy. Okay, in addition to that, I might actually go through some of the settings in here for you. So if we go to Edit Preferences and General, this is exactly the same as what we were just in. It just gives you another dialog box to choose between everything. So the ones I want to show you, the main key ones, you've got the audio stuff. So if you've got a specific sound card that's got certain, I guess if you're doing surround sound work, then you're going to want to come in here and make sure that your speakers are set up correctly according to that. Another important one is your media tab here. This controls where your cache files and your cache database are going to be stored. So if you're running on a solid state drive, for example, you may find that Premiere set it specifically just to that area. Let me stop that. Okay, so in the media tab here, we've got the media cache files and also the media cache database. Now what you might find is that Premiere's automatically selected this to be your normal local drive. That might be fine for some people, but if you're running a solid state drive or something like that as your main drive, usually you're wanting to make sure that it's not just clogged up with temporary files and stuff like that. So what I've done for mine, because I'm running a solid state drive as my main drive, I've actually set this to be one of my other drives that's just a normal mechanical hard drive, and it's got plenty of space on it. So I go ahead and do that. It's not a bad idea to come through here and clean your media cache database from time to time either. It can help free up a little bit of space. Okay, what other settings have we got to go through? Memory settings. In here is basically your control for how much memory you want to allow the Adobe production suite to have. So at least for After Effects, Premiere Pro, Encore, and Adobe Media Encoder, this is going to say, out of all of these 4 programs, this is how much they're allowed to use. In this case, I've only got Premiere open, so that little icon being active is showing me that Premiere is the only application that's going to use the memory. But if I had After Effects or Encore open as well, it's going to say you've got 24 gigs of RAM installed. I've told it to leave 6 gigs of RAM free for other applications, which means that the RAM available for After Effects, Premiere, Encore, and Adobe Media Encoder is 18 gigs of RAM. You can change your optimization between memory and performance. Usually I leave it on performance because there's plenty of memory there. I'd probably recommend, if you're setting up a system for Premiere, I'd probably want 12 gigs of RAM minimum. I know some people are running it lower than that, but especially if you're going to end up working with red footage down the line and you're going to be doing decent length timelines, like, it's going to chew it up no problem, especially if you've got multiple applications launched. So if you can, opt for more RAM rather than less. Okay, autosave in here as well is actually pretty handy. This is usually by default set to 20 minutes. You can change it to whatever increments you want. For me, that's 10 minutes because I find that if a program crashes or if the power switch is off and I've got more than 10 minutes worth of work to catch up on, it's kind of a real nightmare and a real hassle. So yeah, tick the automatically saves projects if you are concerned about it, which you probably should be. Not because Premiere is super unstable or anything, but just because having recent saves is always a good thing. Now you can also tell it to how many different revisions of those saves you want. So default is 5, I've just got it left on that, which is fine. I'll show you where to find them as well if you ever need to get back to them. I'm on Windows here, but if you're in Finder, I guess it's kind of fairly similar. Just navigate to wherever your project files are being saved to. In my case, that's Storage, Project Files, Premiere. Now I've got a whole lot of different Premiere projects that I've worked on over the years, and up the top of them is the Adobe Premiere Pro Autosave folder. So if I jump in here, it's got 5 copies of basically every project I've ever worked on, because it's got 5 autosaves that have hopped in there. So if you find that a project's crashed and you need to get back to it, then navigate back in here and go through some of those autosaves and find the most recent version. You can usually tell the most recent, just add a date modified column and look for the most recent one in there and launch it from that. Okay, so that's that. Are there any other main ones? Okay, this next one's going to be good if you're coming from Final Cut Pro. What you can also set up in Premiere is your keyboard shortcuts. Now it's under Edit, Keyboard Shortcuts. And now what what Adobe have done is they've also included, as well as the standard shortcuts for Adobe Premiere Pro, they've also got the shortcuts for Avid and Final Cut as well. So if you're coming from one of these environments, as an easy way to get into Premiere, you might want to switch your keyboard shortcuts over to that, because it's going to make you be able to get up to speed pretty fast. If you're planning on staying with Premiere full time and it's becoming your main NLE and you don't want to touch anything else, then you're probably better off just leaving it on Premiere Pro and doing it the hard way and learning those shortcuts. Now in addition to that, let's say we got Adobe Premiere Pro and we want to change a keyboard shortcut. You've pretty much got shortcuts for everything within the application. So if I want to get, if I wanted to make a shortcut for exporting a Final Cut Pro XML from Premiere, we would jump up to Edit, Preferences, not Preferences, Keyboard Shortcuts, and I'd navigate through the File option, Export, twirl that down, Final Cut Pro XML. See, that's got no shortcut there, so we click Edit, and in my case, let's make it Control-Shift-F for Final Cut. And now it's told us that that's fine, it's bound that shortcut in there. If you're doing 3 keys, are all the shortcuts 3 keys? No, if you're doing 3 keys, you can't do any more than 3 keys. So if you hit 3 keys, it's automatically going to select that and save it as a shortcut. Now if I wanted to set an AAF, if I hit let me hit Edit, Control-Shift-F, it's going to say to us, look, you've got a conflict because you just set that as the Premiere Pro shortcut, you stupid person. So what we've done is we've taken it, we've put it on the AAF, but now, just so you know, there's no longer a keyboard shortcut for the Final Cut Pro. So we can click undo, I guess, and switch it back if we've made a mistake like that. And that it gives you that prompt is a good idea, because if you start overriding original keyboard shortcuts in Premiere, you're going to find yourself frustrated when you try and use a shortcut one day and then realize that it does the wrong thing. So yeah, just bear that in mind. Okay, now some other options we've got. If we go up to Project Settings and go to General, we've got 2 things here. We've got the renderer, which I explained before. So this is going to let us choose between whether it's GPU accelerated or it's just using the software. GPU acceleration will only work if you've got a supported NVIDIA card that's got CUDA acceleration. You can find that out on the Adobe website with not too many troubles at all. Now scratch disks as well is another option which is pretty important to set. So your video previews and audio previews, I'll explain these later, but what these are basically just pre-rendered versions. So these you'd be very wise to change to a bigger drive, especially if you're running a solid state drive and you don't want it to chew up a whole lot of room. In my case, I've made one on the S drive as well. I've made one called ASD, which in my case stands for Adobe Scratch Disk, and then made a folder called video previews that it gets dumped in. So it means whenever I do a video preview or an audio preview, it's going to chuck it straight into that drive rather than taking up room somewhere else. Now, captured audio and captured video, this is if you're capturing from a camera. This is the default directory that it's going to save into. You'll usually be able to set this from the capture window as well, but you may want to change this here too. In my case, I never capture stuff from a camera that's connected via FireWire or whatever, because I'm just using file-based media. So that's why my directory is just kind of a default directory there. But in your case, if you are going to be capturing in that way, then you'd definitely be wise to set it up so that it's capturing to another drive. If you want it to another drive, of course. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's get into setting up a sequence and actually using Premiere. So you remember that when I first opened Premiere and started a new project, it gave us a dialog box or a prompt box that asked us to select a sequence. So what I'm going to do is I'll delete this sequence that we've got here, and we'll pretend that I'm starting over. So actually, you know what? Let's no, we won't do that. So if we want to make a new sequence, go down to this little box here and select sequence. Alternatively, you can hit Control N. I'm on Windows. I guess that's Apple N. Is that right? Or Command N? I'm not sure. But either way, sequence, bring it up, and what you've got in here is a whole lot of presets that Adobe has made for various different forms of footage. So, for example, I'm in Australia, so we shoot to PAL rather than NTSC. So if I shot some standard definition PAL, I could come in here, and there's a preset hooked out for me. If it's a 4:3, just standard, normal SD PAL production, I could click on that. If it was a widescreen, I could click on that, and pretty much all the rest of the settings would be there. This will give us a description of all the settings that are in there, but for the moment, we're not even going to select one of them. For today, I'm going to be using some footage shot on an EX1, so I'm going to come down, go to XD Cam EX. I think it might have been 1080p footage originally. So I'm going to select that. It'll give us a whole lot of information based on what's in there. So it's saying the frame size of the footage is 1920 by 1080, which is right. In brackets, that little number there gives us the pixel aspect ratio. So in our case, they're exactly square pixels, so it's just 1. The frame rate, which is 25, that gives us the pixel aspect ratio again. It's progressive scan, tells us that it's 48 kilohertz audio. Tells us how many tracks are created along with it, and yeah. So let's set up a sequence based on that. Let's just call it, it doesn't even matter, example 1, and we create that sequence. So that sequence has popped up straight in that project panel, and what we can do now is we can drag footage into this project, or into this timeline. So if we just drag it in straight that way, then we're going to grab the whole of the clip. So that whole clip has ended up in here. If we were wanting to do something different, for example, if this was an hour-long clip for some reason and we knew we only needed 10 seconds out of it, you could either bring it in and just chop it down to size in here, or perhaps what might be better to do is if you double-click on this, it's going to load it into the source monitor. Now once you're in the source monitor, then we can go through it, find the section we need, add what's called in and out points. So we mark an in point, we can mark an out point. Also the keys for those, which is pretty standard for most editors I think, is just the I and O key. Marks an in, marks an out, and then we can either drag it down like that, and we've just got that limited selection, which is nice and easy. We can drag only the audio from it if we use it on that. Let's just pull down the audio and conversely just the video. Or what you might like to also use are these little features here. So one's called insert, and the other one's called overwrite. So I'll give you a quick example of the difference that's going to make. I'll just drag some more media into our project. We'll just dump these down in here. Okay, so if I'm back on this clip, which we are, if I hit insert, it's going to, let me zoom in so you can see that again. It's going to actually shift this clip forward and make room for it, basically. So you can see in the little icon here, it looks like the image is pushing the two halves apart, and then it's kind of coming down in the middle, which is exactly what it'll do. So it pushes it apart and then it adds the new one in. On the other hand, override is pretty self-explanatory. It's just going to jump straight over the footage. You probably can't tell from those images, but it actually has just overwritten the first part of this clip here. So yes, let's delete that. Now, I know this probably seems like a ramble because I keep remembering things I need to explain to you. Now that we've got a sequence here, and we've brought this in, we can see that there's a little yellow bar that runs across here. Now what this says to you is basically that the footage you've got in here can be processed natively based on the hardware you've got on the computer. So Premiere thinks based on what you've got in the computer at the moment, it's going to be able to play this back without much additional processing at all. It's either going to be able to play it back based on encoding done on the GPU or just the native codec on the CPU. So for example, if we were to change this, if we put an unsharp mask on here, then this footage is going to change to red, because an unsharp mask isn't an accelerated effect, so it can't use the GPU to accelerate it. And you'll see if I try and play it back by just pressing the spacebar, that it's actually playing it back no problems because the computer's a bit faster than I would like it to be. But that actually is using up a fair bit more processing. What this allows me to illustrate though is that even when you have a red bar, that doesn't mean that you're going to have troubles playing it back necessarily. If you can play it back without having to pre-render it first, then by all means go ahead, because pre-rendering it's just going to slow you down, and if you're getting real-time playback anyway, then there's no real reason to be rendering it out. On the other hand, let's say we did want to render this out and assume this computer wasn't as fast as it is. We've got a couple of different ways of doing this. If we go to Sequence, we can go to Render Effects in Work Area. Now our work area is wherever this little bar is. We can change this to what we need. So if we go Render Effects in Work Area, then it's only going to render the section between that little bar there. If we tell it to render the entire work area, then regardless of whether it's got effects and stuff applied to it, it's just going to render it anyway. Or we can tell it just to render the audio. So in our case, we want to render the effects in the work area, because we've got that unsharp mask on there, which is an effect. I'm not even going to click it in here because it's bound to enter. So the keyboard shortcut for that is enter, which you'll get used to really quickly. So just hit enter on your keyboard. This little prompt's going to come up while it renders through just that little section there. We wait for that. Render details, telling us how much free disk space there is when we started it. And this is, I probably should have made the work area bar a little shorter so I wasn't just wasting your time with this going. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do that. Let's make it really small. Wait while it chews through that. And what we'll see is that this little work area bar, after it's been rendered, it'll come up green. And that indicates that the footage has been pre-rendered. The CPU has no additional work to do apart from just playing back that pre-rendered piece of footage. If you're wanting to, you can delete that, delete all the render files, or just delete the ones that are within the work area. Whether you use that or not is up to you. Take it for what it's worth, I guess. So yeah, keeping that red bar or this bar here in mind is really important, because there's a lot of people that come from a Final Cut Pro workflow and they realize that, or maybe they don't realize that they don't need to render everything within Premiere, because they're so used to whenever they apply an effect in Final Cut Pro, it tells them that you need to render this footage or you can't even view it, kind of thing. In Premiere, that's not the case. If your computer can keep up with rendering it on the go, then it'll let you. And if it can't keep up with doing it on the go, then you'll just start dropping frames. what I usually do is I try to pre-render as little as I can, because it's just, like you saw, it just took up time pre-rendering that. So if I can edit everything without having to do that at all, it's just going to increase the speed of how fast I'm working. Now, what else have we got? Placing footage in timeline. We've explained those lines. Explain the work area bar. Okay, what else I want to explain? Another thing I want to explain is scaling footage. So if you're working with a red sequence, let's make a new sequence, and let's go to red presets. Now, by default, these red presets aren't in CS5.5. They'll only come once you've installed the importer plugin. So if we go down in here, let's say we're working on a 4K project and shot 25 at 25 frames a second at a 2:1 aspect ratio. Click OK. Now, if I drag one of these shots in from the EX footage, you'll be able to see that that 1080p picture, it's not looking so big anymore, not compared to the red footage that would normally be at 4K. So what we can do is we can scale the footage. Now, this actually isn't a good idea. If you were actually working with 4K material, normally you wouldn't want to put 1080p material in there and start scaling it. But for the purposes of this example, it'll help us out a bit. So it shows us that we can actually increase the size of the footage to match the size of the frame that we're working in. It also works the other way. So for example, if we were working on, let's make a standard def production, widescreen, PAL, that's fine. If we were to drop this in here, the footage now looks ginormous, because 1080p is so much bigger than standard definition. So if we right click again, scale the frame size. Did I actually click on it? Oh, I just didn't update this, that's okay. You'll actually see that it's scaled down that footage to fit within that standard def resolution now. Now, one interesting thing to note is that if you come up to effects controls, click on the clip, this is where all your effects will get listed, as well as a whole lot of the other properties of the clip. So under motion, we've got some settings for position, scale, rotation, as well as there's opacity down there and stuff as well. Now, when you're using scale to frame size, you might expect that the scale value here would change, but it actually doesn't. If you scale within this, you're still going to go up, and 100% is set to 100% of kind of what your scaled frame size is. On the other hand, let's say if we didn't have scale to frame size on, and it's zoomed all the way in now, ginormous, this is still set at 100%. So if we want to scale it down manually, then we'd have to drag it down to, I don't know, what's that, like 50 or 53. There shouldn't be too much preference whichever way you go. Usually scale to frame size is a lot easier, because you can drag in as many clips as you want, select them all, right click scale the frame size, and you'll find that they've all been scaled down to that frame size. Or you can deselect scale to frame size as well, and they've all been scaled back up again. One other advantage of working this way is that because that property is set for the clip itself, if we're now to copy that clip over, let's copy it from here, or Control C, and we dump it in the red sequence, just Control V straight in, then you'll see that that scale to frame size is still applied to it, and it's actually blown it up to the size of the 4K frame. So this can be really handy if you're working between multiple resolutions in different sequences, because you can take your whole sequence, copy all the contents of it, dump it in another sequence that's smaller resolution or bigger resolution, and Premiere will automatically adjust it to the size of the new frame that you're working in. Okay, so if the screen has just changed all of a sudden, that's because I actually had to re-record this section because the capture program's been doing funny things. So we'll give it another shot. What we're going to go through now is the tools you've got available and how to work with these. There's only a couple which are going to be your most main ones. They are the selection tool, which I'm currently on, the razor tool, for actually cutting footage, ripple edit tool, rolling edit tool, and a slip tool. They're kind of the main 5 that I'm using most of the time. Now I'm going to be clicking on them and showing you guys how to use them, but you'd be wise to learn the keyboard shortcuts for them. They're pretty simple to learn, and if you hover over them, you're going to be able to see what the shortcut is for it as well. So let's start. The selection tool is pretty simple. It's what its default is on, and you'll know how to use it straight away because it just lets you select clips, lets you drag and move them around fairly simply. Now the razor tool is what you actually use to cut up the various footage. So as you can see, we can add a bazillion edit points, and then we can jump back to our selection tool to be able to select individual ones, move it around if we need to, whatever you want. I'm just going to undo that, or Control Z. Actually, Control Z all the way back. There we go. Now let's go through the rolling edit tool first. So the rolling edit tool, by the way, to zoom in and out on the timeline, you press the plus and minus keys up near the numbers on the keyboard. Alternatively, you can use this little slider. It'll do exactly the same thing. And the thing to note is that it'll always zoom in on where your current time indicator is. So just make sure you've got that positioned where you need it. Okay, so rolling edit tool. Let's show you what this does. If we had 2 clips together, like this, number 10, number 8, yep, that's fine. The rolling edit tool lets us change exactly where the edit is, although in this case we've got no footage to work with. So let me drag back and let's start again. Rolling edit tool. So the rolling edit tool will let you move where the edit point is, even though it keeps the actual footage in exactly the same position. So for example, this frame here will always still stay at this marker at 7 minutes, 12 seconds and 19 frames. That frame is still going to keep displaying, but we're going to be able to move this edit point around it. Really handy tool if you're just needing to adjust where 2 shots cut together. Sometimes moving it a couple of frames can make all the difference, especially if you're cutting between multiple camera angles and stuff like that in a drama or whatever you're working on. It'll just let you change the timing of where that cut is, but not necessarily the footage that's actually underlying it. Okay, the next tool is what's called the ripple edit tool. Now I should explain, on the normal selection tool first, if you hover over the edge of a clip, you can drag it and use that to readjust how long the clip is, readjust the length of the clip. But let's suppose in this case you've got a situation like this where all you're wanting to do is you're wanting to shorten the length of this clip, but you're not wanting to do anything to this clip. You want this to end up exactly attached where it should be. You just want this original clip shorter. So what you can do instead is you can do what's called a ripple edit. You can use the ripple edit tool for this. So now you'll see if we drag it back, it's actually going to follow along with it. So any amount you remove, the rest of your sequence is going to come back that far. So that doesn't affect just this clip here. That'll actually affect everything upwards of that. And conversely, if I'm extending it, is it going to let me do that? Okay, that's because there's no more footage left. Okay, if I'm extending it this way, it's going to shuffle them all up as well. So it'll affect everything to the right of what you're editing. Now what you can do instead, if you're not wanting to go and select that tool all the time, a handy little shortcut is if you're using the normal selection tool and you're hovering over the edge and you would make a selection like that, what you can actually do is you hold down the control key, and then when you adjust it, it's exactly the same as doing a ripple edit. I'm guessing it's probably the Mac or the Apple key if you're editing on a Mac, but I'm on PC here, so it's the control key. Alternatively, if you've got gaps in there and you need to be able to ripple delete, so rather than just having this gap here, we can right click and click ripple delete, which will do exactly the same thing, but it's a 2-step process, so it's going to take you longer. A shortcut for that as well, shift and then delete, it'll do exactly the same thing. Okay, so in addition to that, we have also got the slip tool. Now the slip tool's a cool one. Might sound a little bit confusing, but the way it works basically is that it will keep the edit points on either end at exactly the same location in regard to the time, but it will let you slip the footage in and out of those edit points. So let me just trim this footage back because there's not a whole lot more to work with. So if I change it back over now, if we grab the slip tool, you'll see that as I'm moving this, the edit points on either side don't change, but the actual footage that's within those edit points is moving around. So up in the program window, up the top, you'll be able to see what's at the beginning of the edit point and what's at the end of that clip's edit point as well. So you can shuffle the footage in and out between those as you need them. It's also really good if you're editing stuff that needs to be in sync and you realize that a certain clip, though it's got the right edits and it's fitting in with the rest of the sequence, the footage needs to be all pushed forward a little bit because his mouth's out of sync or it's not lining up with another action when you do the cut. So the easiest way to do that is with the slip tool. You can just slip it in and out even though the edit points stay the same. Okay, just aside from that, I'll go through some of these things on here. The snap tool is, you'll see it looks like a little magnet, so that probably gives away what it does. It just helps you when you're doing selections, and helps it snap to certain sections. So at the moment I've got it disabled, so it's not coming up at all. But if I enable this little snap magnet, you'll see that it's joining it to the timeline, and we get that little indicator, that little black bar that comes up as well, that just lets us know that it's telling us to put it right against the edge. In addition to this, we've got set chapter markers. So if you're making a DVD, for example, when you send this out of Premiere, those chapter markers will be imported when you import that video into Encore if you're making the DVD, so you can set your chapter markers in here. It's as easy as just going along and setting a chapter marker where you need it. And it'll come up with a little marker with a little DVD icon, so you know that it's that over the top. Now you can also just set general markers. Shortcut for that is the little star key on the numpad. They're there if you ever need to mark something, and you can also add comments and stuff into it as well. Okay, now one last thing for me to cover is that when you're editing, rather than using your mouse to constantly scrub the timeline like this to find where you need to go, what you'll find yourself most often doing is just using the keyboard instead. So the K, J, and L keys are pretty universal in that they control playback. So L being a play key, as in going forwards through the footage, K being the pause key, and J being backwards through the footage. So using these instead of scrubbing manually with a mouse like this, you'll find far better, and you'll find that you can actually just watch the footage back and pull through it pretty quickly. Now, in addition to just standard playback like this, if you actually tap the forwards key, that is the L key, multiple times, you'll find that you can actually speed up and start going faster through the footage. It's kind of hard to tell on the footage I'm giving you because the movement's so slow anyway. But the same goes for backwards too. If you tap it, I think it's probably up to about 4 times, it'll keep accelerating the speed at which it's going backwards. So that's a good one to know, just if you're trying to scrub through the footage quickly and you're not wanting to have to use your mouse because it's imprecise and you need to kind of watch the footage as it's coming back to you. Okay, so a couple of other shortcuts. We'll remember that that the razor tool, the shortcut for that was C. So I mean, we can hit that at any time and change it over and place a cut like that, but what I prefer to do instead is just hit Control K. Now I have actually done something bad. What you need to have happen is you need to have the video track selected which you want your cut to apply to. So in this case we need it to be applied to video 1 and audio 1. So now when I hit Control K, we'll see that that cut is applied to both the video and the audio track. So you can use this to your advantage, like if you're only wanting to have one video track cut, then just select one. Doesn't matter which one it is, and wherever you hit Control K, it'll cut it wherever that current time indicator is lined up. So they're probably the main things to keep in mind, and will at least give you a general start. in Premiere if you're not used to using a non-linear editor. So past from there, we'll keep going on. What have we got next? We have editing tools. Okay, so what I also need to cover is making new tracks with you guys. So you'll see in here that we've actually probably got more tracks than when you started this tutorial. So just let me, I'll show you how to add more anyway. Now I've got to change the selection tool because I'm on the razor tool. Okay, so to add a new video track, let's say for some reason you needed 10 video tracks and you've only got 6 here at the moment, and the default's only 3 when you first open up a project. It's only because I've been playing around with this project. So if you right click and go to add tracks, you'll be able to see here that this little dialog box comes up and we've got options for adding a particular number of video tracks, particular number of audio tracks, and a particular number of audio submix tracks as well. Now I'm not going to touch on audio submix tracks, that doesn't concern us today. But for video tracks, let's say we want another 3 of them. Or how many did I say? I said we wanted 10 altogether, so let's throw another 4 in. Let's say we want another 4 audio tracks as well. It'll give us an option about where we want to place them. So in this case, I'm wanting it after what I've named as the wide track here. But we can place them anywhere we need. Exactly the same for audio too, except for audio you've also got an option between what type of track you'd like it to be. So if you're wanting it to be a mono, stereo, or a surround sound 5.1 channel track, you can do that. In this case, we'll just leave it as those settings, hit OK, and you'll see that we've got more tracks lined up there. Now, I haven't actually hit a limit with how many tracks Premiere can add. Let me see if we can hit a limit. If I try and add 99, we've got over 100 video tracks there. So I have no idea what the limit actually is, but you should never be needing really more than, I don't think I've ever used more than about 10 video tracks at once anyway. But maybe if you've got super complex projects, your projects are super complex. Now, if you're in this situation and you're finding that you just can't see everything again, you can use the tilde key that we explained before, so that's going to blow everything up on screen. Or it'll just maximize that panel on the screen rather. So even though we've got 100 tracks, that's not going to help us out too much. So we can delete tracks as well. Delete video tracks, all empty tracks, or we can select particular tracks if we're wanting to. In this case, let's get rid of all empty tracks. Hit OK, and I'm just going to add some more video tracks back in so we've got something to work with. Let's just add another 3 back in here. Okay, great. So that's how you add more tracks if you're needing them, because having the default 3 is going to be fairly limiting, and you're going to be wondering why you even bought Premiere as opposed to just using Windows Movie Maker or something. So that's how you work that. Now, in addition to that, let's go through applying effects. So one of the things we often need to do in the video editing world is applying effects onto clips, because they may not look particularly nice to start off with. So to get access to those effects, we come over into the effects panel here. Now there's 2 ways to navigate this. You can either start twirling down the folders and looking through it this way. So we can go to, say, color correction, and we want to put some, actually, it's not even in there. What's it under? This is the other thing that will help. The second way to navigate it is to just start typing in what the effect is that you're wanting. So in my case, I know I'm wanting to apply levels, and it looks like it would normally be under the adjustment folder. So you'll see for levels as well, I've got this little folder with an arrow with the fast movement on it, and I think I explained this before, but it just indicates that it's going to be accelerated. It's an accelerated effect, so the graphics card is going to take on the processing for this effect. So if I throw the levels effect onto my clip here, you'll see that our little bar here stays exactly the same color. Still a yellow color, which means that Premiere thinks it can process it natively without any issues. So let's make some quick adjustments. Let's punch these blacks in a bit more and throw in a bit more light. Hit OK, and you can see that's updated our footage accordingly. I can still play it back real time without any issues. which is great. And we can keep layering extra effects straight on top. So I want to go to the three-way color corrector. See, that tells us it's accelerated. It also works in 32-bit, and it processes based on YUV colors as well. I'm not going to go through what that is for now, but that's what those little icons stand for. So let's throw that on here as well. And you'll see that that comes up in a little second. It already is there. It's down the bottom. Okay, so we can twirl this up, and all these effects just stack on top of one another. So we've got our three-way color corrector in here as well, which I just added. You can always rearrange the order that Premiere applies stuff. So if I was to arrange it this way, then the three-way color corrector would be applied before the levels correction would be added onto it as well. In this case, I don't even know which way we want to do it. We'll just leave it this way. Let's say we want to add a bit of blue into those darks, and we want to warm up these highlights a bit. That's looking a bit funny, isn't it? Warm up these highlights a bit more. And Premiere says, no problem, you've got a graphics card that can help us out, so we're still going to be able to play that back in real time. And just to note that the stuff that does have acceleration, if you've got a decent graphics card in here, it's going to really help you out. So for example, I've got a 4K sequence that I've made in here as well. If I copy this with the effects on it into my 4K sequence, you're going to see that because we've done scale to frame size earlier, it scaled it up to the 4K frame straight away. So I'm into playback resolution, it's on full, which is great. If I hit play now, it's still playing that back real time without any issues. It might be hard to tell because there's not too much movement going on, but Premiere's got no issues playing back that 4K file. It's taking a 1080p file, it's upscaling it, it's applying levels, and doing a three-way color correction and playing it back real time at full resolution, which is just kind of nuts and still blows my mind when I do it. But I guess that's kind of the power of being able to offload some of those processing effects to the GPU. Okay, so back in here, that's how you apply effects. It's exactly the same for any audio effects you're wanting to apply. The only difference is, I need to get rid of this before results are going to come up. The only difference is that it'll come up in a different section in the effects controls. So if we were to put a, let's put a multi-band compressor on there. Oh, and I just dragged it onto the wrong thing. I actually need to drag it onto the audio, not the video. You'll see that we have a new little panel come up here called Audio Effects, and it gives us the properties of that, and we can go through and set up that multi-band compressor if we need to. So it works exactly the same. Now the other thing we need to cover that's in the effects panel is the transitions. So let's go through this. They work in exactly the same way. Only difference is that instead of applying them onto the clips themselves, you're going to apply them to the edits. So let's say we want to cross dissolve. We need to drag that right where the edit point is, and it's kind of hard to see on that video. I might just zoom in a bit so we can get a better idea of what it's doing. If we drag that cross dissolve on, you'll see that it now sits between those two edit points. Let me just make sure I have done it. It actually makes it kind of hard to tell what's going on at the moment because I'm cutting up the same clip. So at the moment, the only difference is that we're cutting between a color graded clip on this side and a original raw non-color graded clip on this side. So for the cross dissolve's just fading between the exact same footage. So what I'll do is I'll delete this one. Let's cut that footage down there too. We'll delete this portion. We'll go and grab a new shot that's different. Or are they all that? They are too. Let's throw some new footage in here. There we go. That looks pretty different. Okay, so see between these two ones, if we wanted to cross dissolve between them, we can just throw that on. And now as we go through this, you'll see that we've got a nice cross dissolve between them. Now you can adjust the length of these as well, just like you would for a clip. Just go to the edge and drag out. Now you'll see on this end that I'm not able to do the same thing, and you might be saying, hey Brad, why doesn't that work? And that would be because, have a think about what you're asking Premiere to do at the moment. At the moment I've brought this clip on and I haven't adjusted it at all. So it means that there's no extra footage in this clip. I can't actually drag it out anymore. So if you're to apply a cross dissolve to that, the way cross dissolve works is by fading between one section of footage and another section of footage, but it's telling me, hey, we've got no more footage to work with up this end, so you can't keep cross dissolving. So if you need to solve that, and you actually definitely wanted it to be cross dissolving into this area as well, you would need to first drag this clip back, and actually let's do a ripple delete, hold down Control, drag it back. And now there's actually going to be more underlying footage that's not visible because we've cut it shorter. So we can now click and drag this and move it along a bit further. And if you're thinking really smart and wanting to trip me up, you might ask yourself, what happens if I put two clips together and neither of them have footage on either end? So let's have a look at that option. What's the best way to do this? I'm just going to clear all this out. Okay. So let's drag this out. Let's ripple delete that back. So at the moment there's no more footage on this end to come out, and there's no more footage on this end to come out. So what happens now if you put a cross dissolve on? We get a little error message, and it says, insufficient media, this transition will contain repeated frames. So what Premiere is telling us is that instead of being able to cross dissolve between footage, what it's going to do is it's going to grab the last frame of this footage and just keep on fading it out and hold it on pause in here, and it's going to grab the first frame of this footage, hold it on pause out here until it gets to footage, and then start actually playing. So I'll drag these out a bit more so we might be able to see it a little clearer. So it's actually kind of hard to see, but you'll see up here, you'll see that those waves pause and they just fade out. And conversely on the other side, there's no movement from this shot until we get to this point here. And now you can see those pillars start moving, but before that they were just completely static. Okay, so now that we've looked at transitions, I might go on to what's called the titler. So it's what we're going to need if we're wanting to apply titles to our video track. So the way to do this is we go to the new item button over here and we select title. And what Premiere is going to give us now is a little dialog box with the settings of this title. Its resolution, its time base, so its frame rate, and also its pixel aspect ratio. Now Premiere matches these automatically to the sequence that you're working in. So because we're working in a standard definition sequence, it's matched our resolution to that, it's matched our frame rate to the frame rate we're working in, and it's also matched the pixel aspect ratio as well. So let's go ahead and name this. Let's call it new title. Hit OK. And now we're given this new box. And what we can do here is we can create titles, obviously, but we can also create shapes if we're needing to. We can use a pen tool to do crazy things too. But generally, if you're doing titles in Premiere, you're not going to be doing anything complicated. It's just going to be lower thirds or just like a title text or something like that. So let's make that. We've selected the type tool. Just click on here, and we call it new title lower third. Okay, and you might say, that's so cool that we can do that, Brad, but you know what, that font looks atrocious and I need to fix that. And I'd say, well, you know what, there's a whole lot of fonts down here and they look atrocious too, so don't touch them, because I don't know who would want to make their video look like that, but it certainly isn't me. So thankfully Adobe gives us a bit more options than just those ones there. You've got access to just your regular font library up the side here. So let's go with something like Typograph Pro. Maybe we'll do extra bold, change the font size. We could change the color if we needed to, which I don't really want to change anyway. let's just leave it white. Move that in here. I think we can throw a shadow underneath it if we wanted to as well. And then we're done. So you don't need to save this or anything. It's automatically getting added to the project. So if you close this, you'll see, oh, what's happened? It's not in our program window. That's because it's only been added to the project panel over here. So we see we've got new title here, and it acts just like any other footage. It acts like a still picture, basically. So if we drag this in onto our timeline, we can see that it's basically a transparent picture just with that text that sits there, and it lives on top of our other footage that we've got playing below it. So if we're wanting to, we can extend these out a bit. We could apply cross dissolve onto the front end of it so it fades in and fades out. But let's suppose your client says, actually, let's suppose this footage looked much different than what it was. Let's suppose that for some reason it was really low contrast and we couldn't actually see much in the background, and it looked like this. Now, because I've actually got the text, I've added that shadow underneath. I might disable that so we can see what it looked like normally. Because I've got white on a fairly bright background already, you might say, well, that's great, Brad, but I can't really read what is going on in that title. So I'd say no problem, we can fix this, and this is just an interesting segue to be able to explain what a color mat is to you guys. So go to the new item button again, we go down to color mat. In here we get the exact same dialog box as before. All those settings have been matched to the sequence we're in, so we can just click OK. And a color mat is just a full solid, just full of one color, basically. So in our case, let's say we want to make it a, let's make it maybe really, really dark orange. Brown in our case, let's call it brown mat. Okay, we drag this on. And we go, wow, that's some seriously awesome brown we got right there. It's so awesome we can't see anything below it. Which is a problem, of course, because we actually want to see the footage in the title, and that's just due to the arrangement of these layers. Because the topmost video layers are what's going to be seen first, because this brown mat is a full solid, you can't see through it, all we're seeing is colour. So we need to place this title on top of it. Move these down. And now we also need to somehow make the footage visible below this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump up, I'm going to select the brown mat first, then I'm going to come up to Video Effects, twirl down the Motion property, and what I'm going to do is deselect Uniform Scale, and I'm going to scale this height all the way down to something like that. Now if I had Uniform Scale on, let's suppose that I do, it would keep everything in proportion. It would keep the whole shape of the rectangle or the frame in proportion, so it's not going to change from that shape at all, which is why we need to deselect Uniform Scale and then bring it down. Okay, we can use the Position property here, move that down over the lower third, and yes, we will keep scaling the height. So just to scale the height, you can either punch in those numbers manually, so say 50, or you can just click on them and start dragging and get it and kind of refine it that way. That's what I usually prefer with stuff like this, because it lets you get a little bit more finessed. Now if you're able to select the layer, you can actually kind of control it up here as well and adjust it, just so you know. Let's say I want it about there, that's fine. Okay, so now that we've got that, your client may say, that's great, that looks totally awesome, and you say, no wait, there's more. I can do cooler things in this. I can make it slightly transparent by adjusting the opacity, or even better than that, I can adjust the blend mode on it as well. So maybe something, whoa, it's kind of hard to see, isn't it? Highlight? It's a little bit see-through. But anyway, you've got all the Photoshop blend modes there accessible to you if you need them for whatever. So let's just leave it like that for now. I might adjust these levels back so our footage actually looks half decent, because that's not what I would have called it before. Whatever. Okay, that'll do. Okay, so we've got that lower third in there, and we can treat the matte exactly the same as any other footage. So if we're wanting to apply a cross dissolve to this too, just make sure that video track 2 is selected. And if I try to press it, I actually expected it not to do something because we had both tracks selected, but because this has got a cross dissolve on top as well. Let me just do an experiment while you guys are here. If I hit Control D while both tracks are selected and we're at the beginning of both frames, Control D, it's going to hit them both up with it. But if this was slightly down and I tried to press it, you wouldn't get that one as well, because you need your current time indicator to be positioned on top of it. Okay, and now this is the tricky one. This is where it goes astray, and you actually need to select a single track because it's not able to apply the cross dissolve to this one at this point because it's not on the edge of this clip, even though we've got the track selected. We actually need to deselect video track 2, so just video track 3 selected. Now when we hit Control D, it's going to apply. Otherwise, when I tried to hit Control D when it was like this, it just did nothing because it's saying, hey, you can't do that because you've got video track 2 selected. There's no edit point here for that to get applied to. So that's how you do that. Now we have that fade on. Woohoo! And we can fade it back off again. Okay, cool. Okay, so that pretty much covers everything for you guys. I'll just quickly go through if you're wanting to export your footage out. Okay, so File, Export, Media. Shortcut is Control M. Control M brings up the exact same box. Now, what you're seeing here is the source footage. Now, when I say source footage, don't get that confused. With what we mentioned before with the source footage in this dialog box up here. So, for example, up here, we're not talking about that source footage. It's not the original raw footage we're talking about. Although now it is because I've just selected the source footage. But if I'm working in the timeline here, and I hit Control M, the source footage in this case is whatever the source is for the encoder or the export settings. So in this case, the source is the program window. It's our timeline that's getting fed in. Now, in addition to this, we've also got the source range. So this refers to how much of our sequence we're actually going to export. So in our case here, let me just cancel that and zoom out on this track so we can see what's going on. Hit Control M again. At the moment, our source range is selected for our work area, and as you remember, our work area refers to the length of this bar. That's defined as our work area. So you can see that even though the whole sequence runs this length, the work area is only specified for this area. It doesn't run the whole length of the sequence. So we can adjust that here if we're needing to. We can select the entire sequence, in which case it would export everything out here. Or instead, we can actually specify a custom range. So we can just move these handles, or you can scrub and hit these guys to position it as well if you're wanting to do that. What I'm usually doing for my stuff is pretty much exclusively just going with the work area, because normally I'll be in here, I'll set the work area for the duration that I need it, because it's generally easier to set it with a work area bar, and that way I know that what I'm exporting is actually what I've selected in the timeline. So now we've got everything in there, which is great. Now the output tab up here refers to what your frame's going to look like once it's been exported from Premiere. So it won't show you necessarily what the compression will look like once it's been applied to it, but it will show you what the frame size looks like, and it will also show you the resolution that it's been exported at. So if I go to 100% and zoom this out, you'll see that even though this footage was shot at 1080p originally, it's doing 100% of the sequence resolution, and in this case that's just a standard definition sequence. So 720 by 576 pixels. So that's what's represented there. Now, normally you'll just leave that on fit because you'll understand that anyway, and that way it won't clog up your entire work area. But if you're needing to check the actual preview quality, or you're needing to check the actual resolution, you can always jump into 100% here and make sure it's looking as you expect it to. So let's see what else we've got. let's go to our export settings. This is the bulk of what you'll set in. This will determine the size of your export and the quality of it. So the format is going to be your main thing. In this case, let's suppose that we've got a client that's wanting us to deliver them a DVD. So we'll go to MPEG-2 DVD, and we can use a preset if we want. These are kind of a good working place to start from that Adobe build into Premiere Pro to just give you some presets to help you speed up your workflow. You could use these and not modify them at all if you're wanting to, but usually I go back through them and make sure the settings are exactly the way I want them. So let's, in this case, because we're in PAL land in Australia, we'll set PAL Progressive Widescreen High Quality. Okay, let's go to the Video tab, and I'll go through some of this stuff quickly, just the main essential ones. Quality, variable between 1 and 5. That's kind of the amount of processing it takes your computer to spit out, not necessarily the file size that's going to be spat out. So I'm going to bump that up to 5. It's going to take a bit longer to render that way. All the other settings are fine because we've selected that preset originally and now we're just modifying it. So frame rate is 25. Field order is none because it's progressive footage. Pixel aspect ratio is correct. Now I've got an option here for render at maximum bit depth. So what this will actually do is it will use all the color information in your original footage, or at least the maximum amount that Premiere can use for it. It will use that in exporting your final encoded file. So it'll improve the render quality, but it'll also come at a penalty because it's going to take longer and it's going to use more memory while it's doing it. So if you're doing final export, say it's your render that's going to TV or to web or wherever, make sure you've got render at maximum depth checked because you obviously want to make sure that the best quality is getting spat out. On the other hand, if it's just going to a client for approval and they just need to get an idea of what it looks like currently and where the edits are sitting, leave it unchecked because it's going to increase your render time and you may not need to worry about that at all. Okay, other options. This is bitrate settings. This will determine our size and the kind of quality of compression that's being applied to it. So I'm just going to ignore that for now because this isn't a tutorial on that. And then we've got another couple of options down here. Now, use maximum render quality will apply to whenever your footage is being made smaller or being made bigger. It affects the scaling of it affects the scaling quality. So if it's unchecked, then the algorithms that Premiere uses to scale footage aren't as high quality, obviously. So your render times are going to be faster, but you might find that your images look like they have a bit of jaggies and they've got a bit of aliasing on them. I pretty much always, when I want the export to actually look decent, make sure you've got that ticked. It really does help improve the quality whenever any scaling is going on, but it also does boost the render time fairly dramatically as well. So again, if it's not needing to be a super high quality export, it's just for preview purposes, then leave it unchecked. Okay, so we've got another option here called Use Previews. Now you remember before we were talking about how we could pre-render footage in here, and when we did so we had a little bar that changed to a green area, meaning that Premiere had rendered out that footage and it had it sitting there, so it didn't have to apply any additional effects when it was playing it back, it just had to play it. So what this setting here tells Premiere to do is when it's checked, it says, instead of using the original source footage, I want you to use the previews that you've already made. Now you may think that's a good thing, and in some cases it will be, because it's going to decrease the amount of time it takes to render out the footage, because Premiere's already done a whole lot of the processing in creating that render file originally. But what it's also going to be problematic with is the fact that you're going from your source footage, then it's going to be a pre-rendered copy, and then you're going from that pre-rendered copy to your final export. Now the problem there is that you're doing compression twice, because the previews that Premiere gives you as render files, they aren't uncompressed video files. They're preview renders. If they were uncompressed, they'd take up huge amounts of space, and they would probably be pretty hard to play back as well in some cases. So Premiere compresses it once, and then it's going to use a compressed file to compress again. So you're actually going to decrease the quality of your export if you're doing that. So in any case where you're wanting it to be a decent quality export, you need it to be the best quality possible. Make sure that's unchecked. Don't use your previews. Get Premiere to go back and use the original source footage and apply all the effects on the go as it's exporting them. Use frame blending option. We haven't touched on that, but it usually applies to when you're slowing down footage and it's blending multiple frames in between where that footage has been stretched out. For our purposes, you don't need to worry about that so much. Okay, other options. Multiplexing refers to when you want your video file and your audio file to be merged in one. You want them both together in one file. If it's multiplexed, then they will be in one file. If it's not multiplexed, then they'll be split into two separate files. Okay, so that covers that. For filters, you've got a Gaussian blur which can be applied. I have no idea whatsoever why you would want to apply a Gaussian blur on your final export, because it's just going to make your footage blurry. Maybe there's something that I'm not thinking of. There probably is, but for me, I don't think I've ever done an export where I've used Gaussian blur. Then you've just got audio effects, which are going to change depending on the format that you're using, and also your FTP settings. If you're wanting to upload your export to a server as soon as it finishes rendering, you can do that from within Premiere. So now that we've got that set up, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to overwrite one of the previous tutorials. Save that. Okay, so what we want to do is look at these two options we've got down here. One's called Queue, one's called Export. If we click on Queue, it's going to send our export out to Adobe Media Encoder. Adobe Media Encoder is an extra program that Adobe includes with Premiere Pro and a whole lot of their production suite, that its sole purpose is just for rendering and exporting and transcoding between different file formats. So you can load up a whole lot of different files and sequences and After Effects projects. Actually, I don't know if you can add an After Effects project. Oh yeah, looks like you can. But you can add them all in here in a queue and hit the start button, and it will just sit through and transcode every single one of them over time. So what this will do is, even when we've got that closed, if we click on Queue now, it's going to send our sequence from here out to Adobe Media Encoder, add it in there, and then prepare it and get it ready for exporting. Now the reason there's two in there at the moment is because I had a previous one in here from when I did the tutorial earlier and it mucked up, so I'm just going to delete that one. And now if I'm to click on play, oh not play, sorry, start queue, you see that it's chewing through the footage that we just prepared. It's exporting that out to DVD size and downscaling it and stuff with the settings we just put into it. So I don't actually want it to finish that because I'm not too interested in that anyway. Gives us a little prompt, would you like to finish the current file before the queue stops? No, I don't want to finish it. So we go, okay, that's done, it's been stopped. So we can close that and say, thank you very much, Media Encoder, but we don't need you right now. Because I want to export it straight with Premiere instead. So let's go Control M again, bring up these settings. If we're wanting to export out with Adobe Premiere, instead of clicking on Queue, we just hit Export. And what this will do is, instead of bouncing it out to Adobe Media Encoder, it'll take up Premiere, and it means you can't keep editing anything while you're exporting. So usually you'll only want to use this for projects that are going to take a minimal amount of render time, because if you're wanting to keep working in the background, then you'll need to be sending it to the queue so it lives off in Adobe Media Encoder and it sits processing in here while you're still back in Premiere editing away, kind of thing. But on the other hand, if it's a really short export, then you could export out just straight with Adobe Premiere. So I'm telling it to overwrite that same file that we just made before. I'll click on Export. It says, do you really want to replace these? And I say, yep, I really do. Gives us a progress bar in here, and it just chews through that export in here. Nice and simple, nothing too complicated. Cancel that as well, because I don't actually need to see it. So that should be everything for you guys. Hopefully this has been useful. If you're new to Premiere or you're new to editing in general, I trust that there's been some stuff to help you get up and running on your feet. I realise this has been a really basic tutorial and covering some real super basics, but we'll keep doing some more tutorials in the future that'll be a bit more advanced, and we'll cover some red-centric kind of workflows in particular. So look forward to them, and I hope you enjoyed this. This is Brad signing off. Thanks.